Today we're going to look at earthquake mitigation. Before we do, I think we need to ask some questions. First one is, do we have an understanding of where earthquakes will strike? You see, mitigation is the removal of, the reduction of any risk to any people or property. So the first thing we have to look at is, do we have an understanding of where earthquakes will strike? Well, the answer clearly is yes. We know where they're going to strike because we know where the plate tectonic boundaries are. Answer: because we know the forces that drive plate movement. We know where the plate boundaries exist. And we know the movement, the motion, and when we say that, we really mean velocity of the plates. All right, so yes, we do have an understanding, and it's quite a good understanding. Let's ask another question. Can we predict earthquakes? Well, it's a tricky one. Some people would say, yes, you can predict an earthquake, and I guess to some point you can say that I'm sure that between now and this time next year, Los Angeles is going to have at least one earthquake, and Perth will most likely have none. So yes, I guess purely based on location and where somewhere is and what type of plate boundary it sits on, you can predict that there will be an earthquake, but you can't predict exactly where they're going to happen or even the size. No, we can't predict earthquakes. But we do know where they are most common. Therefore, and those three little dots mean therefore, because of this, the places where they do occur can prepare and mitigate. All right. If we go back some way to when we first started looking at hazards, we started talking about risk and vulnerability. Let me just give you a quick reminder of that. So, the impact of an earthquake, and any other hazard for that matter, depends upon the elements at risk. So, for example, if we're looking at the impact of an earthquake on population, well, that's going to depend upon a few things. It might depend upon the education level. Remember with Nevada del Ruiz and the volcano in Colombia, they did not have a great deal of education and therefore couldn't understand the maps, so they couldn't protect themselves. Perhaps things like current health status. And the good example you could even use today is COVID-19. Why? Because for a certain amount of people, this particular virus is very, very dangerous. But for others, it doesn't have a great impact at all, a great impact on them. What other things might change the risk of a population? So we've got education level, we've got the health status, you could also say the average age. A place with an older age group could be more at risk. Now I've talked about infrastructure. So the infrastructure that you have, how does that, I guess, make you more at risk of an earthquake? Well, let's see proximity to hospitals. Does the place where the earthquake is happening have hospitals close by? Are the buildings earthquake proof? How prone to quakes are they? So these are two examples of how population can change how at risk a group is, and also the infrastructure could change how at risk someone is. And we're going to look at a little bit more about this today. I will talk very quickly about vulnerability and vulnerable groups. Some groups are very vulnerable. We think about the different types of vulnerability that we've got. There's physical, the buildings might shake and the building structures might actually break themselves. So that's a physical vulnerability. Social. Are they educated? And are they prepared? And economic vulnerability. Are there government systems in place for them to react? So if you think about in relation of what's happening at the moment within Australia or even in the world, how vulnerable we are to the particular hazard that we have of COVID-19, you can say that, well, in terms of a physical vulnerability, we don't have to worry about that. But in terms of a social vulnerability, how educated are people? How do people go about their social interaction? Are they social distancing very well? Are we prepared as a society to all isolate? There are some societies where this has not happened at all. And if you look in the United States, as of today, which is, what day is it? It's Tuesday, the 7th of April, I think the United States has 360,000 cases of COVID-19 and it's had about 10,000 deaths. So one of the issues that I think that they had over there was the fact that they weren't prepared to socially isolate, which could be the reason that they have so many deaths at the moment. And another vulnerability, obviously, is economic vulnerability. And I guess you could look in Australia at what are we doing in terms of keeping our economic systems in place and even in people employed, if you think about it. Some countries don't have any opportunities to make sure that their citizens are kept in jobs, whereas we're quite fortunate here. So it doesn't necessarily mean you, for example, with a hazard like COVID, we can see these different sort of vulnerabilities in different places. All right, so let's get back to earthquakes. And I want to bring your attention to something I would like you to do a little bit of research on. And I will make this a formative assessment, just a little bit of research. And that's to look at 2 earthquakes, BAM in Iran, and that's 2003. With a 6.6 on the Richter scale and 26,271 dead. At the same time, we had the San Simeon earthquake in 2003. It was 6.6 on the Richter scale also, and we had 2 dead. If we're looking at the vulnerability of each of these, what impact did the social, economic and physical vulnerability of each place have on the impact? Each earthquake was the same size, but it had different impacts. So each earthquake was the same size but had different impacts. I'm going to get you to look at, look at these 2 earthquakes and we want to answer the question why. Why was there such a difference between the amount of people that died at both earthquakes? All right, now let's move on to the next part of our lesson,